We have no money in this house because there's an unemployed person here.
Susan spat out, glaring at me. Keith and his father were shocked by her words, but Susan's anger only grew more intense.
It's because we have one freeloader here, that's why we have no money. Do you even realize being a housewife is just being unemployed?
Susan continued to attack me. More than feeling sad or angry, I was just fed up with her. A year had passed since I started living with my in-laws, and Susan had repeatedly called me unemployed. She just couldn't stand me being a stay-at-home wife. But today, Susan seemed even more persistent in her insults, probably upset about something that happened outside. Then, she dropped a bombshell.
You're not worthy of our precious son, Keith. An unemployed person like you should just leave.
Keith and his father, James, were shocked, not expecting Susan to go as far as telling me to leave. As they were about to yell at her, I cheerfully responded to Susan.
With pleasure.
With a smile like a bar waitress, I told her, and Susan just stood there with a blank expression, saying, "Huh?" Keith and James were also showing faces of utter astonishment. I then immediately began preparing to leave the house. And I prepared the divorce papers and had Keith sign them. "Susan, I will submit this divorce papers to the city office. So, goodbye." After saying this and leaving my in-laws' home, I could hear Susan's loud laughter from inside the house. Imagining what would come next, a smile crept over my face. "You're mistaken if you think things will go your way." Muttering this, I started walking away. My name is Rachel. I'm 30 years old. Ever since I was young, I loved movies and dramas, so after graduating from high school, I entered a vocational school for film and video. There, I learned video editing skills, and after graduation, I managed to get a job at an advertising agency. The work was challenging, but I enjoyed every day. One day, through my job, I met my now husband, Keith. Keith, 2 years my senior, was a man with an easygoing charm. He loved cameras and was knowledgeable about video editing, so we hit it off immediately. Without any formal proposals, we naturally progressed from good friends to lovers. After several years of smooth dating, one day, Keith looked at me more seriously than I had ever seen before. "Rachel, I've decided to go back to my hometown and start my own business as a photographer."
"Really? You've decided to go independent?"
Keith had mentioned before that he wanted to return to his hometown and start his own business. "Yeah. And, Rachel, I want you to come with me. I want you to marry me." Keith's serious gaze wavered slightly with anxiety.
"Of course. I'd be happy to,"
I replied with a big smile. Keith's hometown was a bullet train ride away, so I would have to quit my job at the company where I was working. Although I felt sad about leaving my job, my desire to support Keith in his independence was stronger. Above all, I understood that being with Keith was my greatest happiness. Thus, Keith and I got married, and I left my job to become a full-time housewife. Keith started his career as a freelance photographer, working hard every day. We rented an apartment near his parents' home and started saving money for our future home, leading a modest yet peaceful life. However, it wasn't long before Susan proposed that we live with them. Susan said with a smile, "Hey, Rachel, Keith, you two are saving up to build your own home, right? Then why not live with us? It would save on rent. There's no need for you two to live in an apartment by yourselves. Come stay with us," Susan said with a smile. Since we had a reasonably good relationship with my in-laws, Susan's offer was appealing. However, the idea of living together permanently was daunting, and I couldn't immediately agree. I had heard stories of cohabitation gone wrong from a friend who moved in with her in-laws right after marriage and ended up divorcing due to conflicts. That made me hesitant about Susan's proposal. The offer is, well, appreciated. But we're still newlyweds, and moving in together right away seems a bit much. Plus, you and Dad are still healthy, so there's no need for care. There's no reason for us to live together. Keith, sensing my feelings, gently declined. But Susan didn't back down and continued to bring up the topic of living together.
Living together would make every day so much fun. I dream about it every night. A dream where the four of us are happily sharing meals. When will it become a reality? Come on, let's live together soon. Fulfill my dream.
Being told this repeatedly made me feel guilty for constantly refusing, and eventually, we agreed to live together. Susan's eyes sparkled with joy, and she was very happy.
Oh, really? I'm so happy. Let's get along well, Rachel. We'll share the household chores and help each other.
Please, the pleasure is all mine. Seeing how happy Susan was, I felt good about our decision to live together. After we agreed to move in, Susan often called, seemingly unable to wait for us to start living together. Your room will be on the second floor, in the corner. It gets great sunlight and is just perfect. I've cleaned it thoroughly for you. Wow, thank you so much. In the time leading up to our living together, Susan was very kind to me, which gradually eased my anxieties. However, one thing that bothered me was how much Susan adored Keith. It's normal for a mother to love her son, but sometimes I felt she was a bit too overprotective.
Hey Rachel, what's for dinner tonight? Keith works hard every day, so make sure he eats something nutritious. But it can't be all meat, remember? Balanced meals. Make sure you're properly supporting Keith. So, what's the menu for tonight? Tell me quickly.
Being bombarded like this made me slightly uncomfortable. Moreover, Susan frequently expressed her desire to live with Keith, saying, "Oh, how I wish I could live with Keith soon." It seemed to me that Susan wanted to live with Keith more than with everyone together. However, I told myself that it was natural for a mother to want to be with her son and tried not to dwell on it too much. Besides, I had no other particular concerns about Susan, so I focused on preparing for the move. And so, we started living with my in-laws as planned. At first, everything was peaceful as Susan and I shared the household chores, but it wasn't long before she showed her true colors. This happened one day when Keith and James had gone to work, leaving Susan and me alone at home. "How long are you going to take hanging the laundry? You're so slow. Can't you move a bit faster? Once you're done with that, hurry up and finish the dishes. In fact, I'm leaving all the household chores to you today. You're unemployed, so you must have plenty of time, right? Being unemployed must be nice. Make sure you clean thoroughly. Got it?" Susan snapped at me in a harsh tone I had never heard before. Are you going somewhere, Mom?" I was shocked, but managed to ask while trying to keep my composure.
Yes. Unlike you, an unemployed person, I'm busy. I'm a career woman, you know. I live a life pursued by various duties every day,
Susan said proudly. I had heard that Susan was indeed a career woman, working hard at a large trading company. But that was until 2 years ago. Susan is now 62 years old and retired at 60, so she is currently a housewife. Despite this, her demeaning me as unemployed left me bewildered. I was at a loss for words. Then, with evident irritation, Susan commanded,
"What are you spacing out for? Get moving! Hurry up and finish hanging the laundry."
Yes, yes. I responded, overwhelmed by her forcefulness, and I resumed the housework as instructed. Susan constantly criticized my way of doing chores, making me redo the cleaning multiple times.
Absolutely not good enough. You can't say you've cleaned with that method. Look, do it again, please.
After seemingly satisfying her urge to torment me, Susan left the house with her expensive bag in hand. Alone in the house, I was left stunned. From then on, Susan frequently pushed household chores and cleaning onto me. She would leave the house dressed in expensive clothes and bags, returning with numerous shopping bags, while I was left to manage the housework. In front of Keith and James, Susan played the role of a good wife and mother. I considered telling Keith and James about Susan's behavior towards me. However, I didn't want to upset the kind-hearted Keith and James, so I struggled to speak up about Susan's true nature. Gradually, Susan began to blatantly assign chores to me even in front of Keith and James. Keith often rebuked his mother.
Mom, why do you always make Rachel do all the household chores? We agreed to share them, didn't we?
Don't be mad, Keith. It's because Rachel doesn't work. It's only natural for her to do all the housework, cooking, and cleaning. Susan said this without any remorse, and then James scolded her.
You aren't working either, are you? What are you even talking about?
James's point was valid. When confronted with this, Susan would grimace and fall silent. James is 3 years younger than Susan, making him 59 years old. He is nearing retirement but still actively working at a publishing company. Known for his gentle nature and being very kind to me. When alone with me, Susan often boasted about her time working at the trading company. She probably avoided these stories in front of James and Keith because she didn't want to hear "You aren't working now, are you?" From Susan's words, it was clear she took great pride in her corporate career. Probably feeling superior by comparing her past achievements to my current status as a housewife.
I graduated from a prestigious university and joined the trading company, where I was a star from the first year. I was always the ace, constantly praised by my seniors. I can't even count the number of times I was recognized in the company.
That's impressive, I said, prompting her to become more smug and look down on me. Right? Compared to that, don't you find your life dull and boring? Well, it seems like you don't have any capability to shine in society. Being unemployed probably suits you. I'm quite different, you know. Oh, well. While Susan's condescending attitude increasingly angered me, knowing that Keith and James were on my side provided some comfort. I made a point of finishing the chores quickly before Susan could comment and took to retreating to my room whenever possible, minimizing the time I spent with her. I merely nodded along to Susan's boasts about her corporate days, gradually mastering the art of excusing myself to my room whenever her bragging seemed likely to drag on. Susan seemed desperate to share her stories with me, but lately, she appeared frustrated as I often retreated to my room. However, I pretended not to notice and continued with my days. As a year of living together was about to pass. During one dinner with the 4 of us, Susan suddenly started sulking and said, "Today, Tina bragged to me." "Tina, that's your friend, right?" Keith asked, to which Susan nodded and began speaking gruffly. "Yes, our neighbor. She just went on a family trip to a hot spring resort. They stayed in a fancy room with an open-air bath. She said the food was excellent, especially the tender meat that melted in your mouth. Apparently, it was a delightful trip." "That sounds nice," James commented, but Susan twisted her face in annoyance and snapped back at him. "It's not nice at all. Were you even listening? I got bragged to. It's like she said, you couldn't afford such a luxury inn, could you?" I felt so miserable. Why do I have to feel this way? That's quite an overreaction, Mom. Calm down a bit. Keith tried to calm her, but Susan's rant didn't stop. It's not an overreaction. Why can't you understand how I felt then? It's the first time I've felt so miserable. It's frustrating. Then, Susan turned her anger towards me. She glared at me and spat out the words.
"Mom, what are you saying?"
Keith immediately intervened, but Susan's anger only escalated. "We're broke because there's a freeloader here. You haven't said a word, but you know it's about you, right? Why don't you say something? Don't you realize being a housewife is just being unemployed?" Susan kept blaming me, but I was honestly fed up. Angered by her hypocrisy of criticizing me for being unemployed while she was in the same situation. I couldn't hold back and retorted. "Susan, you're unemployed now too, aren't you?" "What?" She was wide-eyed, clearly not expecting me to talk back. And her face turned red as she screamed at me.
"You are not worthy of our dear Keith. The unemployed should just leave.
While Keith and James scolded Susan, I loudly declared,
"With pleasure."
With a smile like a bar hostess, I made my announcement, leaving Susan dumbfounded. Keith and James were also in shock. I then quickly cleared my own dishes, finished washing up, and started preparing to leave the house. Seeing this, Susan said mockingly,
"So you're really leaving? Ah, what a relief. Divorcing such a wife is the right decision, Keith. Mom, enough is enough."
Keith was furious, scolding Susan. James was saying, "Apologize to Rachel right away," but Susan just sulked and never apologized to me. Without speaking to anyone, I silently packed my things into my suitcase. Keith watched me anxiously. Amidst this, Susan, oblivious to the tension, demanded, "Hey! You're only washing your own dishes. Take ours too and do the washing up." I naturally ignored her, while Keith and James's voices scolding her filled the house. The next morning, after I had packed my belongings, I told Keith something in our room. Then Keith and I signed the divorce papers I had printed out from the computer. "Susan, I will file this divorce papers at the city hall. Goodbye." With that, I left my in-laws' home. From inside, I could hear Susan's loud laughter. She was oblivious to the repercussions that were about to unfold. A smile came over me, and I murmured, "You're mistaken if you think things will go your way." Then, as I had declared, I submitted the divorce papers at the city office, finalizing the divorce between Keith and me. Half a year later, my phone rang with a call from Susan. "Hello?" As I answered, Susan immediately started ranting over my voice. "Finally got through. I've been calling you so many times, but all I got was a beep and it wouldn't connect. What was that all about? Oh, I had set your number to be blocked. We're strangers now, after all." I had blocked Susan's number since leaving the in-laws' house and had just unblocked it recently. I was slightly surprised that Susan called right after I unblocked her number. Blocked calls. Don't mess with me. More importantly, where did you take my precious Keith? He's gone. Did you do something to him? Do you still have feelings for him even after the divorce? Susan was shouting in anger, as furious as ever. It had been a while since I heard her voice, which was still full of vigor. "Could you please lower your voice a bit? My ears hurt."
"Shut up. And where are you now?"
Even after being asked to calm down, Susan continued to shout, unable to contain her excitement. In contrast, I calmly informed her. "I've built a house and just finished moving in." "What?" Susan's momentum halted abruptly, and she fell silent. However, she quickly snapped back to reality and started ranting again.
"What are you talking about, being unemployed? Where would an unemployed person get the money for that? A house? You said you were saving for a home, but there's no way you, an unemployed and now single person, could build a house."
"I have an annual income of $30,000. I stated, causing Susan to gasp in shock over the phone. "You've always ridiculed me as unemployed, but actually, I stream videos. I'm a YouTuber, to be precise." "A YouTuber? Rachel, you? And you earn that much?" Susan asked in disbelief. "Yes, that's right. I make videos about beauty products and trending items. They say I'm good at editing, and thanks to that, my annual income has reached $30,000. Indeed, after resigning and marrying Keith, I had utilized my editing skills to start video streaming. It was already going well from the start, but I never expected to earn as much as I did." "So, that's how it was? You were always holed up in your room because you were making videos?" "Yes, well, that's one reason. Making videos did take up a lot of time. While escaping Susan's boasting was a major reason for my retreats, I indeed wanted to allocate more time for creating videos."
"What do you mean? Don't be so reserved. If you were earning that much, you should have told me sooner. I feel terrible for thinking you were just an unemployed nobody. But if you're making that much money, that changes everything." Keeping such important things secret, Rachel, you're so mean.
Upon learning about my income, Susan's tone changed drastically, as if flipping a switch.
Hey, now that we're on the subject, you should gift me a trip. Of course, it should be to a luxury inn. Book one that's even more expensive than the hot spring resort Tina visited. Now I can finally show her.
Tina was Susan's friend. Susan had been upset about being bragged to by Tina on the day she told me to leave the in-laws' house, and it seemed she was still holding a grudge. I sighed and responded. You should go with the money you earned at the trading company you're so proud of.
What? What kind of response is that? Despite making so much, aren't you too stingy? How greedy! Just book the luxury inn already.
The real greediness seemed to be on Susan's side. I was somewhat amazed that she could so brazenly demand such things after treating me so poorly. No matter what you say, I have no intention of giving you any money. And about Keith, I am currently living with him. What? I thought you two were divorced. Susan exclaimed in a ludicrous tone. Yes, we were divorced once, but we remarried. Keith married into my family. We had agreed on that from the beginning. Married into your family? Indeed, on the day I left your house, Keith and I had discussed and decided to divorce once and then remarry, with Keith marrying into my family. Keith was relieved to know I had no intention of leaving him. I'll stay with my parents for a while. I've already told them, so Keith, once you're ready, come to my parents' house. Okay, I understand. I'm really sorry, Mom. Keith hung his head, but both he and James had shielded me from Susan, and I was grateful to them for that. Then Keith lied to Susan about having a long-term photography project and moved with only what he needed to my parents' house. Susan seemed unable to fully grasp the truth I had revealed. I've been calling Keith too, but all I got were beeps. Was he blocking my calls as well? Why? Susan sounded bewildered. Yes, Keith has cut ties with you, Susan. I had blocked your number for a long time but unblocked it after moving successfully. I thought I should let you know, considering you would probably be looking for Keith's whereabouts. Of course, I won't disclose the address. Keith will continue to live with me, so please stop looking for him. So, that's... Murmuring, Susan was silent for a few seconds before shouting.
That's all lies. Are you threatening Keith? There's no way Keith would cut ties with me.
Susan refused to believe my words. As I pondered what to do, Keith came over and took the phone from me. Mom. It's me. Keith? Thank goodness. So it's a lie that you're cutting ties with me, right? Rachel is threatening you, isn't she? Tell me where you are, and I'll come to get you. Susan's voice was desperate over the phone. No, everything Rachel said is true. I've decided to cut ties with you, Mom. What you did to Rachel is unforgivable. From now on, you and I are strangers. Goodbye. With that, Keith handed the phone back to me. I then spoke to Susan again. Susan, do you understand now? Such a... She seemed to be sobbing. I'm going to hang up now.
Wait a minute. Don't hang up yet. I accept that we're cutting ties, but please, could you lend me some money?
Susan pleaded desperately, still fixated on money at this juncture. Excuse me? That's why I said I won't reserve any luxury inn for you.
It's not about that. Actually, it got revealed that I made a lot of purchases with your father's credit card, and now I'm on an allowance. I can't survive on just $600 a month. It vanishes in a moment.
Ah, so you have been splurging, Susan. James was worried because the savings in the house account were dwindling, and I told him. When we were living together, I mentioned how you frequently came home with bags from brand stores. Keith and I had kept in touch with James all along. Because of the trouble Susan caused, James even helped with the expenses for our new home. Recently, when James confided in me about the diminishing savings, I shared my observations of Susan's behavior during our cohabitation. Susan was always coming home with loads of shopping bags despite being unemployed, which I found suspicious.
You told Dad. What have you done? He got so mad at me that he put me on an allowance and made me fill out all the shopping books. He said if I didn't do it, he'd divorce me.
It's your fault for spending recklessly, Susan. You don't have any income right now, do you? And considering your spending habits, receiving an allowance of $600 is quite generous. You should be grateful to James. Susan, you really need to reflect on your actions. As I spoke in disbelief, Susan started making excuses.
But when I was working, I could buy anything I wanted, so I just continued spending the same way after retiring. And when I go shopping with friends, I have to buy brand items to not lose face.
I don't understand. Why do you need to put on such pretenses? Susan responded as if it was the most natural thing.
It's not about showing off. I am an elite who worked at a trading company. I deserve to own luxury brands.
There's nothing more to discuss with you, Susan. I'm going to hang up now. Listening to Susan's irrational arguments gave me a headache, so I hung up the phone. Right before I ended the call, I thought I heard Susan's wail of despair. Later, I learned from James that Susan quickly became frustrated with the tight financial control. She secretly used his credit card to make expensive purchases, which he soon discovered, leading James to declare he wanted a divorce. Despite Susan's tearful pleas, James's decision was firm, and he did not waver from his intention to divorce. Forced to accept the inevitable, Susan was kicked out and moved into a cheap apartment. Since then, she reluctantly started working part-time to cover living expenses, struggling to deal with having much younger bosses, which was a significant source of stress for her prideful nature. Since then, Susan has called me numerous times, begging for money and complaining about her part-time job. Listen, Rachel. That younger female boss criticizes everything I do, even though I think it's helpful. She tells me not to bother with extra stuff. Can you believe that? How can she speak to me, an elite, like that? Could you please stop calling me? We're strangers now. Despite my clear disinterest, Susan was relentless. Come on, it's just a little bit. Can't you lend me some money, even a small amount? You earn a lot, right? Please. No, I've said no many times already. I responded coldly, and Susan began to dramatically sob. That's cruel, Rachel. I hate living like this. How did it come to this? I planned to have a relaxed and elegant retirement. My life is a mess. Oh. It's all due to your own actions, Susan. If you don't realize that, I don't think your life will ever get better. Please don't call me again. After saying this, I hung up the phone and blocked Susan's number again. Since then, I haven't known what's become of Susan, but I hope she's taken some time to reflect on her actions. Meanwhile, thanks to the success of my video streaming, Keith and I started an advertising company together. With the savings we had accumulated, we've been able to live without much financial worry. Also, we discovered that a new life is growing inside me. Blessed by James and our families, Keith and I are eagerly awaiting the arrival of our little one.